So, first of all, can we just have a round of applause for these 5 brilliant presentations that we got this morning? I'm so impressed with just the vast terrain that we covered in just a few hours, but also with some themes that I think run through everything we were talking about. And at the risk of oversimplification, I think one of the main ideas that we find everywhere in all of these discussions is kind of how the past haunts the present. We obviously see that in Wang Tuo's work. We see that in your reflections about the brink of the Great War and the matrix that Yuk Hui proposes for how to think about the moment we're facing. Obviously, we see that in Donna's work and her interest in resurrecting endangered craft practices as a form of resistance. We see this, of course, in Clementine's work on the Metabolic Museum, and again, in Lawrence's kind of speculative history, looking forward to what will eventually also be the past. So I guess I just wanted to ask very openly, because the last thing we need is the sort of panel where everyone needs to respond to the same question at the end of everyone having given such a thoughtful presentation. I don't know, what really struck any of you from any of the other talks that you heard this morning?
I'll just go. I actually wanted to have a quick reflection, because one thing that really stayed with me is the how should I put it, the presence of space, whether it's architecture or craft or a kind of philosophical space or an architectural one. This idea of or the museum, somehow this idea of architectural space was the container for these histories or futures that we're dealing with. So it's just one thread that I observed. What do you think, Dana? No, I'm kidding. No.
I do kind of feel, I think, like the slightly odd one out, in the sense that, they're talking about technology and maybe I think the pros and cons and the future of our world is going to be AI and technology, and I'm kind of old-fashioned in the sense with the handmade. And I think it just made me think of it more like what you said about, think of AI more as a child rather than adult. But the problem for me is less about the technology, but it's the human behind that and what we're capable of doing with technology. Historically, with something good, with science, we created the atomic bomb. So for me, those are my kind of anxieties when it comes to AI and the future, and kind of also like what you said about that when the machine took over the people's jobs, that there wasn't this huge kind of lack of jobs, and they kind of embedded themselves into other things. But for me, I felt like they were forced to do that in a way. It's like you have to adapt, where I think choices are important in what you want to do, whether, where you want to work, and sometimes technology takes that away from you.
I have to say that I liked when you began and you said that confusion is a motivation, that this is kind of a helpful, nearly therapeutic position to take. And then what I was really fascinated about, because I like the notion of the organ, you have the publishing organ. You need an organ as writers and artists if the rest of the publications and books and magazines have become so cosmetic and so similar that you set up your own organ. But when Yuk Hui spoke of the expansion of organs, it becomes very interesting, because it's like we're totally disjunct or being disjuncted, and it's that in between how we connect it and how we can recognize each other. Who are our interlocutors? Who do we make artworks for? Who do we do exhibitions for? I get terribly concerned about this attitude that if you put enough text on a wall, you will address the inaccessibility of the artwork. and then you kind of completely disempower the artist and their option to offer the public a more complex way into this confusion, if you like. And I don't really understand the, what's the word, the acquiescence, of artists in the context of exhibition making when we're in this kind of multiple organ confused state of being, and the acquiescence on the part of the public to go to museum exhibitions and then kind of give up and just go to the cafe. And I think that has to do with ergonomy. I think we have to look at this confusion and these different situations as part of something that has to do with how we move in the world, how we physically deal with these differences.
Yeah, I just remember maybe it's Lawrence. He mentioned something about at the beginning of his talk is like we should save ourselves first, and like to be selfish. And I think to be selfish is great because I have this kind of experience a lot. Like when I go out, when I talk about China, actually they don't really care about China. Yeah, but it's like the same thing, vice versa. When I talk about a lot of things on the other part of the world, it's like because I don't really understand the context. I don't have that knowledge, and that's different. That's totally another story. So I'd like to say that so when we're still in the honeymoon of globalization, this kind of a whole art thing is, I think the main target is to communicate with each other. But when we look back, when we're now facing this kind of a frustration or failure of the globalization, it's like we lost so much time, for the past several decades, because that communicating was just like we're trying to prove our own stereotype or cliche, like by communicating on a surface level. So I like that, just we need to save ourselves first, and we need to really go deep, delve into our own reality to save it. Yeah, it's I do like that.
So just maybe two small responses. Firstly, on the question of space, I would prefer talking about a place instead of space, because I think when we talk about space, we think of something homogeneous, like a space in front of us. But the place is very different, because place is historical. So when we say that we are confronting the failure of globalization, but I do believe in that the consequence is that we are getting closer to each other. It's not, and when we, like in your work, I saw that the importance of place, and because place is not. It's not about identity. A place is always a resource. So when you go to a place, you find resources. A resource that is we can chase in history, in knowledge production, and so on. And we can ask, what does it mean by this resource to us today? Here we are at this particular place. There are a different form of resource which you can get from China, for example. And how can we put them into conversation? How can we orient this form of knowledge towards the future? I think that's a big task, and that we have to address. The second point is about the organs. I have a problem when you said that we should treat the AI as a child, because I think either we treat it as a child or an adult is the same. It's the same kind of anthropomorphism, and I don't think that this could be a good way to understand AI, because at the end, what is AI is a machine that is performing its function. When we tend to think there's creativity in AI, I'm not saying that AI, there is nothing amazing. It's amazing. I use it every day, and I always continue being amazed by that. but it is executing its function. If it does not deliver, then it's a malfunction, then it's not working. And I think we have to make a distinction between functionality and creativity. And in a way to think of what is our relation to this organ, to this new organ that by mistake we thought that it is another human, and then we enter into a kind of illusion. So thank you for raising up raising the question of organ again. I think or maybe we can think of how could we develop a new organology at this particular moment when we are constantly shocked by its development.
Back to you.
No, well, I mean, it's interesting because this idea of the human and non-human came up several times. You talked about species narcissism. You talked about the Center for Non-Human Excellence. And then I think one of the most fundamental things was your comment about the epistemology underlying computer science, and maybe by extension, any structure or framework or discipline. And maybe looking past the human as a way of expanding that framework or bringing it up for question in a new way. Discuss.
I'm just thinking about the idea of a function with AI. It's really interesting. As a fiction writer, I often think of, I can't remember who the quote is about, but basically one critic was criticizing a novelist, saying that they are a style in search of a subject. You know, this idea that they had this style of writing which was like really great, but they applied it to anything equally, and they're just like, it could be about mountains, it could be about adventure, it could be about civil war, but they are just like mindlessly applying a style to something. And I think an interesting thing that I have no idea about is this idea of what is the function of something that is being created at the same time. And my sense is that the kind of core existential question, which is, were you created with a purpose? I mean, this is my understanding. Or were you created without a purpose, and your purpose is to find out what your purpose is? You know, this idea of a Bildungsroman, of a coming-of-age story. It's like, where is my place in the world, and what will I do about that? So I guess as a fiction writer, the idea of anthropomorphizing the AI, or applying personification of nature, all of these things, for me, it's like a way into thinking how it might be like. But in my discussions with computer scientists, they tell me that there's no unified thing. It's a subject. It's an area of research that everyone has a different entry point into. So yeah, I think whenever I talk to different people about AI, it's very different interpretations. Also with the purpose of it and the kind of essence of it somehow.
I'm kind of fascinated with listening to looking at your work, Dana, and then what everybody else has said, is how long do you think that things or conditions last? Do you know how do we gauge this if we're already incredibly used to fast communication? Or I see it in a curatorial context where nobody questions the fact that exhibitions last 3 months, and then you have 1 week to take down if you're lucky, and another week to set up, and then it goes on again. There's no question behind this. Why not have?
I feel attacked.
No, well, no, not at all. I don't mean it in an. I've seen it happen. The scenography gets taken down, the budgets start again. There's no questioning of the timing of what happens in a museum, how long people can stay there. That's why if you give them a workspace, you're guaranteed they're going to usurp the heat, the light, the visual information in front of them. And I think that this question of how long we want these different forms of representation, these different organs, how long, what is the longevity? So that's, I think, why I brought back this kind of mysterious Bob Dylan quote. You know, what is this infinity that we're looking to today on our skin, on our bodies, on embryos, on language forms, on, you know, what do you think about time, this, not space, not place, but this question of what words do we use to speak of this change in temporal awareness or consciousness?
I mean, for me, in my experience with time, just naturally when you work with craft, it is about time. It takes time. Production of my artworks take months. You know, that year we produced that work, I only made 2 artworks because of the lack of time. And I think, you know, it's a conscious decision I made that I don't necessarily. I won't be an artist that can mass produce to keep up with, you know, all these different paces. And, you know, when you're working with galleries as well, they all want, you know, works for this art fair, this exhibition and stuff. And my work is not digital. I can't show it in multiple places at multiple times. And that's kind of just the way I work. And unfortunately, I have to say no if there's not enough time for what I want to do. Or if they're like, okay, we need an exhibition next week, can you participate? No, I can't. So I think that's my own way of working that I've actively chosen, and it works for my own mental health as well, because I do need that slow pace that kind of craft has given me, and technology doesn't.
In a way, it goes to Wang Tuo's idea of living between aftershocks, right? Maybe we're all kind of on different rhythms that coexist in different ways. Or your idea of metalepsis, which...
Maybe I just add one word to the question of condition. I think it's very interesting because now we are we also accelerate the kind of production of conditions. So, for example, in the past years, you probably hear conference like art in the age of AI, art in the age of NFT, art in the age of AR, art in the age of VR. So almost every half year you see a new condition coming. And of course, I think this is a production. You know, there's the demand of the market that it pushes you to think. You know how what kind of innovation you should produce under this this fabricated condition. But on the other hand, I think that where condition might be something also productive for us to think of what kind of change do we would like to put forward. So, for example, we can look into the postmodern condition of Jean-François Lyotard. That the postmodern condition was kind of framed as resistance of the continuous process of modernization and so on. So I think it's quite interesting to think in this way, and maybe also productive to think, if well, under what condition are we capable of making changes to address the crisis that we are talking about today?
I don't know. Just when we talk about like accelerations, people always believe that the history is progressive, but actually, I don't really believe that this is progressive. I can clearly see that actually we're like going back forward. In a lot of moments. I remember like many years ago when I get on the train. The fast train of China is quite fast, and there's a LED light between the coaches. It says this train is like a 200 miles an hour or 300 miles an hour, and again, it can travel just in one night. It can travel like 2,000 miles, and you can reach there just in a blink. And that made me remember something, in a Asian Chinese like a folklore. It says they have like two men, they're friends, and they were like they're so good to they're very good to each other, like good friends, and they have a promise that the next year at the same time they should meet up. And but 1 year later, one of them just forgot, and but eventually they meet up. And so while they were drinking and talking, and the man came, he just said to the other man, he said, "Man, I'm not a person. I'm not a human anymore. I'm a ghost already, because I just forgot about our appointment, and I cannot make it this time. I just remember this today, and we're too far from each other. We're like 1,000 miles from each other. But I remember, the old man says, the human cannot travel 1,000 miles a day, but the ghost can. So I just kill myself to be a ghost to come here to see you." So that moment when I was sitting in the coach of the train, the fast train in China, it was like, God, I'm a ghost right now. So it's like we're going back time. Yeah. So this is definitely, even when we look back at the recent history in China, when we talk about Darwin, so we have a very wrong translation about his theory. And there's also a scholar called Yan Fu. He translated Darwin's book, and he made his theory into something progressive, because we have to have something like a progressive theory to push the Enlightenment movement, to push the modernity, to push the country into something they believe that is the next stage. And when we look at China, and they have this so advanced technology today, but and especially every time we want to get out of China, when people from other parts of the world, they say, "Gosh, it's China. They have cars like the different, all kinds of also the drones. They have the battle jets. Everything's so advanced." But actually, one thing to me we can clearly see that is who has them, who has the power of those advanced technologies, and so there's definitely the power structure of it, and also the entire country. You can see that clearly. They try to push behind this as a new form of propaganda, the technology as a propaganda, and it's already the new form of the realist, socialist realism. So, it's very hard for us, inside China to talk about the backwards of technology. We cannot say technology is bad, because you're like slapping the face of the country. And it's very complicated. Yeah, I have to say. Yeah.
All right, it might be a nice moment to open it up to questions from the floor if there's anyone with. Yeah, and do we have like a microphone passing technology? There we go. Okay, yeah, maybe it was right here. Yeah.
By the way, there is a really great line in a libertine novel written in 1742 by a man called Crébillon fils, son of Crébillon. It's called The Sofa. Maybe some of you have read it. It's worth reading. And at one point in its 400 pages or so, the person who the narrator is speaking to, it's an Orientalist style novel, says, "It's harder to know where to stop than to invent." I think that fits quite nicely in this kind of, propagation period of life. Anyway, sorry.
First of all, thank all of you for coming here and for your presentations. This question might sound superficial. It is not meant as such. You have all spoken about crises from the past, looming crises for the future. What can we do during our present? These are big, serious, deep questions. Yet you're all smiling, and I'm asking you why you're smiling. Is it hope? Is it resilience? Is it faith? Give us something positive, please.
I think there's a certain joy in apocalyptic things, basically, and I think honestly, that's why there's so many of them. and we're smiling. But I guess, again, what the Greeks would say, what the ancient Greeks would say is that the function of tragedy is like to have catharsis when something really bad happens, because the tragic inevitability of these things happening is somehow comforting. And if we trust in that fate rather than try to fight it through ego and trying to do more through action, there is a certain joy in that, basically. So I think that's maybe one reason. That's the one of the not purposes of suffering, but maybe one of the unintended consequences sometimes. The other thing I was just thinking, as everyone was saying, it's like this graphic on the wall, which I initially read as this like stock market ticker, I realize is obviously the mountain range, because I'm not from mountains. But then I thought, like, so many of us talking about this time frame. Are we bouncing back? Are we in between earthquakes? You don't know the sample size of the times that you're living in. And I think in my studies of technology or even science fiction, one thing that people are really bad at is what's called, second order consequences. There's the intended purpose, and then there's the unintended result. And I guess as creators, we have some idea or some intuition of what we're doing, but we don't know where it's leading. And I think part of the role, maybe, of us doing the work that we're doing is to maybe trigger some unintended consequences, because what I know about avalanches, for example, is that you have controlled avalanches and you have uncontrolled avalanches, and controlled forest fires and uncontrolled ones. And part of the reason of having the controlled ones is that modern technology for skiing or for forestry has created artificial conditions that are really catastrophic when the bad stuff happens, so that the whole forest burns rather than a small localized part. So I feel maybe this triggering of slow avalanches or provocation of small crises is what prevents the more catastrophic ones from happening. So maybe that's what a kind of someone who, like a scientist might say, who's studying the forest or natural landforms.
So to answer your question, why are we smiling? So I think first of all we need to return to the word crisis and what it means this word is from Greek. And crisis means the moment to judge, the moment to make decision. So that means that we are in the moment, we are forced to make a decision, to make a judgment of what is happening. So it's not to lament that we are going to be doomed or what, because as I try to say that pessimism or optimism do not solve the problem. You either you are a pessimist or you are optimist. It doesn't really solve the problem. But rather, what we need to decide collectively, where do we want to go? So it's not to say that we invent something and we don't know where we are going. I mean, that's nihilism. That's a 21st continuation of the 20th century nihilism. But we need to think together, where do we want to go at this moment that we have to make a judgment or make a decision. And this might involve a fight. We might have to combat. We might have to fight for what we believe to be common good. So that's why I think, I believe we are not saying that we are coming to the apocalypse, but rather we're trying to describe a situation where we have to make a decision and what are possible in front of us. So, yeah.
I think for me personally, as a Middle Easterner, it has been quite bad in a state of crisis for decades, whether it was the Civil War and the Arab Spring to now what's going on, and I'm not optimistic. I think on the contrary, just what I'm witnessing, the rise of kind of fascism, right-wing governments. I mean, even me getting here was really difficult to just get a visa. There is a sense of hopelessness, and I am expecting it to get worse, at least where I'm from in the Middle East, before it's going to get better. And I think the only kind of hope I have is in my artwork, it is a sort of internal looking way of dealing with wounds, right? Like what you said about taking care of yourself first before you can take care of the world. I'm in that situation. It's like, how can I just make an effort when you feel so hopeless and there's literally nothing you can do? So yeah, that's the perspective I'm coming from. It's just more about bringing awareness. I'm giving this incredible opportunity to speak to different audiences, and I think there's a responsibility to that as well. Like, how can you share knowledge and change whatever way you can? Yeah.
I actually think that's a really wonderful place to leave this.
No,
unless
I
you-
want
you-
to say
okay.
that I'm smiling because I'm happy to meet you. And I think that that's very special and has to do with the Verbier Art Summit. We don't know each other. I hadn't met any of you before. I'd met Yuk Hui in a party in Berlin one time, many years pre-COVID. But I'm smiling because there's a sense of, I wouldn't say alliance, but there's some kind of sense of trusting the interlocutor that I'm next to. And I think that is incredibly pleasurable, number one, and healthy, because wherever we live today, we are in our little kind of isolation areas, and we're thinking up ideas very often alone. And so it's great to meet you, and that's why I'm smiling. And thank you, because you are such a crazy man that you brought us all together. And that's wonderful. Yeah.
Here to that. Thank you so much. Okay, great. All right, well, lunchtime. And enjoy the afternoon. There's so many wonderful things going on, which Annelieke explained earlier, and are listed, I think, in detail in everyone's program. So I hope we'll all have the chance to take advantage of other talks, of happenings around Verbier. And we'll see you back here tomorrow afternoon for the second round. Thank you. Thank you.